All right. Beautiful. So this is the Sunday Sounds of Dhamma program. And can you hear me okay? Can everybody hear me? Okay, thank you. And that means we'll have about a half an hour or so of meditation, half an hour of Dhamma talk, half an hour of questions and reflection at the end, closing with the dedication of merit. Before we start all that, I just want to say that on December 8th, we're going to have a Sangha holiday brunch right after the Dhamma talk. So 2 weeks from today, we'll have the Sangha holiday brunch. Everyone is warmly welcome. We're not going to limit the number of people. We'll just all crowd in if we have to. And everyone is welcome. And yeah, goodness knows, I don't know, we'll have eggnog or something. I don't know. But also the registration for the Buddhist Global Relief New Year's Retreat is happening now. I will be co-leading that with Ayananda Bodhi and the Venerables Thupten Monlam and Thupten Lamsol from Travesty Abbey in Washington. That's January 9th and 10th. And in the meantime, regular schedule. Again, my apologies that we were off a bit from our regular schedule this past week for the ordination preparations and having guests here, but all of that joyful stuff has happened. Now we're back to regular schedule. Yeah. So for this morning's meditation, I think that I think we're going to do a meditation on the sense basis. So looking at ourselves into our meditation posture. I'd like to begin with just a bit of movement in the body, and maybe moving the head. And finding an upright and balanced position. Feeling the body supported by your cushion or your chair. And really relaxing into that. And beginning to turn the attention to the sense of touch in one hand. Just receiving the sensations of touch as they arise. And perhaps noticing the feeling tone of the sensations of touch in the hand. Are they pleasant or unpleasant or simply neutral? Each sensation with its own feeling tone. And now shifting the attention to the sensation of smell. Aware of any sense that might come into awareness. It might be very neutral, each sensation, or unpleasant, or pleasant. And now another shift to rest the attention on the sensation of hearing, noticing sound arising and ceasing. Staying curious about sound, moment by moment. Aware that each moment of experiencing sound is unpleasant or pleasant or neutral. Now one more shift to return to mental activity. The mind is a sense organ. So how is it to receive mental activity? As if it were just like a sound or smell. Oh, being curious about thoughts as sensation. As mere experience. And noticing that they too have their feelings of brings us to the end of our meditation. Unfortunately, because of a little bit of a tech breakdown, I can't share the chant on screen today. Folks in the room, there are some chant sheets there if you want one. And everyone online, please be sure to go ahead and mute your microphone. There you go. Beautiful. Y si algunos vinieron esperando que hubiera interpretación en español, lastimadamente no va a haber hoy porque Claudia no pudo asistir. Así que lo siento, no va a haber traducción. All right. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Bhutang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I had planned one talk for today, but it turns out that it's a very snowy day here, or somewhat snowy day here in the Washington, D.C. area. And so maybe it is for you as well, or probably not for folks who are in the Southern Hemisphere. It's the hot time of year for them. But nonetheless, I thought that I would give a talk more apropos of the weather today and tell you a bit of a story about a time when I was practicing in Japan. So I was ordained in Japan. I practiced in Japan from the fall of 2006 through the end of summer of 2008. And with some breaks coming back and forth in between to coming back and forth to the States for visa reasons and family reasons. But so I did 4 practice periods there. And one of the defining characteristics of my ordination master's temple was that we did a lot of takuhatsu. Takuhatsu is the Japanese word for alms rounds, or we would call it begging rounds back then. And that was because Harada Roshi's monastery was the head temple for over the subgroup of 27 other smaller temples in this part of rural Japan. So it's in a little town called Obama, Japan. Hilarious, because Barack Obama was running for office as to be the president of the United States around the time that I arrived. And they were so excited that their town was named the same as the candidate for the president of the United States, that they wrote him a letter, and he wrote them a letter back and everything. they had little cakes in the supermarket with a caricature of Barack Obama's face on it. It was great. You can't get away from American politics no matter where you go in the world. But nonetheless, it was quite the remote place to be practicing. We were about an hour and 15 minutes northwest of Kyoto, on the backside of the main island there. And that means that we were on the strait of water, the body of water, between China and Korea and Japan. So it's called the backside of the island. And that means also that the Siberian winds come down across the Chinese plain and across that body of water. And it's a very, very snowy part of Japan. Obama is. Little fishing village, little fishing town. We could walk, and when the weather was good, we could walk or ride our bikes on the 4 hours that we had off every 5 days. We could walk or ride our bikes over to the ocean, to the water, just at the edge of town there. So the winters were pretty intense. We were given these little space heaters. They call them stobu. Stobu means stove. The stove of sorts. You could use it for cooking, but not really. But and you were allowed to use your stove for about an hour every day in your room. Other than that, you were subjected to whatever the weather was. Usually around this time of year, the period of time that I'm talking about is the January. We would do the what's called winter begging rounds, winter takuhatsu, from January 2nd or so until the 30th or the 29th. It's 28 days. Yeah, 28 days. And so it was like, 0 degrees Celsius, -1, -2 degrees Celsius in your room, in the hallways, most of the time. And then we would go out to do our begging rounds into the town. And you can't wear gloves. You have a kind of hand cover, a very thin cotton hand cover over the back of your hand. And then you have these very thin cotton socks and sandals to walk through the snow. And thankfully you could wear, like layers underneath your robes, but you're actually wearing your robes hiked up to the knee so that you don't drag them in the snow. And so it's pretty intense practice. And we would go every day into town. So we'd have a quote unquote hearty breakfast, which was like rice and tofu in the morning with a little bit of seaweed. And then we would go into town for about 2 hours of walking on alms rounds. Thankfully, you got to wear a hat. You got to wear one of these big kind of bamboo style hats. And I remember that at that time, I was doing a lot of snacking. This is normal for me, that my body, when the weather gets cold, my metabolism speeds up a little bit, and so I feel more hungry. And so, but I was doing an unusual amount of snacking. Like I would go into town to the grocery store on my break time and pick up some rice crackers or some peanuts or things to munch on in my room. And I noticed that I was like, eating a lot, not, in a bad way, but just kind of munching. But I figured, talked it up to the weather. It's cold, and you have to keep your calories up. And then we went out, and the route was that we crossed across the neighbor's field first, And then we got to the street where we would go kind of through this back street, cross the big highway, and then into the main part of the town there. And we had our bells. You have your begging bag on your chest. You have your bowl in your left hand, your Buddha bowl, your biggest bowl, with a little piece of cloth in it so that the coins don't damage it. And then you have your bell in your right hand, and you're supposed to be ringing your bell continuously and chanting. And the chant is, oh. Like that. You just keep going until you need to take a breath, and hopefully your partner is also not taking a breath at the same time. So it's one continuous sound of bells and people and the crunch of snow, and it's cold, and the senses are very alive. And and we got out there one day to just the beginning part of the walk. We were still in the field of the neighbor, and I had every cell in my body wanted to turn around. I had this huge wave of aversion, like, I do not want to do this. And I just kept walking for a bit and imagining myself turning around and walking back to my room and turning my stogu on and dealing with the consequences of whatever that would mean. But I guess there was one cell or two that actually still did want to do this practice, because I didn't turn around. It just kept going. That day and all the future days. But something very interesting happened about a week later, not quite, maybe 5 or 6 days later. So in the middle of this 2-hour period of time, we would have a break for tea so that we could warm up our hands and have some snacks or some tea and just sit down for a minute in the midst of this very intense practice. And in somebody's garage somewhere, it's like, wooden benches along the walls and a folding table at one end and big stogu in the middle. And I sat down and I noticed that I didn't feel the desire to snack anymore. That I could just sit there quietly. And I wasn't even really that concerned about whether I was going to get a cup of tea or not. I just sat down and I felt very still, and I thought, oh, something's changed. Something has changed. And what I realized over time was that I had been covering up one hindrance with another hindrance. Yeah. So what are the hindrances? The 5 hindrances are sense desire, ill will or aversion, sloth and torpor, which are these old words that we use for dullness, kind of dullness and laziness or sleepiness. And then restlessness and remorse. So the other side, agitation, right? And then doubt. Not the good kind of doubt, when you question whether you really understand reality, but the kind of doubt which is kind of corrosive. And so that snacking thing was sense desire. That was a constant state of like wanting more, right? More stimulation of the senses. the eating, the smell of the eating, the taste in my mouth. But what happened was that was covering up the other hindrance of ill will, of aversion. Aversion to this very intense, very demanding practice that we were doing, this physically uncomfortable practice that we were doing. So when that aversion was met with the knowing of it, right? When it arose in this very intense way, and I was faced with it directly, and I had no other choice but to face it directly, step by step, that one day. Then the need to cover that up went away also, right? If that aversion falls away, then the cover up also falls away. But that only became apparent to me in the rear view mirror, right? That only became apparent to me after the fact. So much so was the change that Roshi noticed that day that I sat down and I didn't ask for a cup of tea and I didn't have a snack, and he went to hand me a cookie. Here, you want a cookie? This is Roshi messing with me, right? He's observed that something has changed, or maybe it hasn't, right? And he's testing. He's testing. I didn't take his cookie. I didn't want his cookie. I didn't even see it as a test at that moment. I was just kind of like, no, thank you. I don't need the cookie now. And I didn't. I didn't need the cookie at that point. So it was a very, very interesting lesson for me in the power of meeting my own suffering without even being able to change anything about it. The next day was just as cold. The next step even was going to be just as cold and wet and uncomfortable and painful. I can't change that. I could, maybe, if I made a different choice, but I've made this choice and I'm staying with that choice. And so that's not going to change. And even if I go back to my room, it's still cold. Right? So I learned something about the power of meeting my suffering, not with the intention to fix it, but the intention to know it. And that made all the difference. That made all the difference. And the funny thing is that, we were talking about this actually in the fundamentals class this morning, that this idea that you could somehow erase the negative stuff by having these positive things, I like rice crackers and peanuts, was also wrong, right? It didn't eliminate that underlying aversion. Of course not. When you say it out loud like that, it makes sense. Of course, that eating a cracker doesn't resolve my aversion to this pain, this painful practice, this difficulty that I'm having. Even if I had been doing it right then in the moment as we were walking along, which you couldn't do, of course. But even then, right? And the reason why I'm telling you this story is because we spend a lot of our lives doing exactly that. Trying to cover up one problem with another problem. Trying to attend to or avoid attending to the pain of our lives by thinking that somehow we will fix it, we will cover it over, we will do something more pleasant, we will bring it under control, we will manage this or that. But you have the power to meet it and to let it go. You have the power to do that. Puts me in mind of a conversation. Wow, we're all full of spontaneous Dhamma today. It puts me in mind of a conversation that the Buddha had with a young monk that he was sending to a part of India that was known to be very rough and ready. He said, you might not be well received there. And the monk said, well, I'm going. And the Buddha said, well, what about if they yell at you? And he said, well, at least they didn't hit me with a stick. And then the Buddha says, well, what about if they hit you with a stick? And the monk says, well, at least they didn't throw stones at me. And then the Buddha said, well, what if they throw stones at you? And the monk says something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing here because I don't have this in front of me. The monk says something along the lines of, I'm prepared to die. It's okay. I'm prepared to die. I'm prepared to live moment by moment and see what happens. See what happens there. Put my life in this moment fully. And that's what you're asked to do. It's a big ask. I get that. But that is what you're asked to do. To put your whole life on the line every moment. Because it is. That is how it is. There's no escaping that. And that doesn't mean passivity, right? I still had a choice about whether I was going to walk in the snow. That monk still had a choice whether he was going to go to those lands of the rough and ready. We have choices that we make in our lives. And we do our best to make them skillfully, right? Just as I talked about last week, the Buddha said, yeah, we need to eat enough to nourish ourselves and to be well and to have joy. So we do all of those things. We try to make good choices. But we do that having faced the reality of our lives. Because without having faced the reality of your life, you don't even know what you're covering up, actually. You don't even know what suffering you're hiding from yourself. And one detail of the story that I should definitely not forget to tell is that part of the reason why I kept walking was because of Roshi. If Roshi could be out there walking along, mind you, he had boots because he was in his 80s. But if Roshi could, and he'd done it for years and years and years, decades, right? If Roshi could be out there, then I could be out there. So in the end, it wasn't some great power of my own. It was me relying on the Sangha that made it possible to learn all these things and experience my own life. Kind of ironic. That we learn to experience our own lives only in relationship, only by relying on our good Dhamma friends who are also walking this path, with or without snow. So if there's anything you take away from today's talk, it is that you have to face your life. In the hard times and in the good times, you have to face your life. So surround yourself with the people that help you do that. And then you can do anything. Then you can do anything. All right, friends. That was the brief talk for today. And we have plenty of time for questions or reflections. Yes, Haya, let's see now. How will we do this? I think I have to pass you this mic because, oh, well, actually, let's see, maybe this one will work. Okay, we're trying out all our tech things.
Thank you for the teaching. How, when it's not a situation where you're doing something with the Sangha members and you see that they can do it, so you can do it, I get that, even if it's hard. But when you're having to discern something for yourself that you feel like is holding you back in a way, but then well, for instance, at the retreat, I remember Kodo was discerning that he could face the sense that he was about to have an asthma attack, right? And he could just not. But that's really hard to discern where that edge is, what you're ready to deal with in such a, advanced way, in a sense. There are situations like that where you would like to move past something or not have it distract you, but how do you discern when you're ready to do that? Mm-hmm. Or whether it's safe, whether you care if it's safe, or it's a very tricky thing to deal with. The physical body, where's the bottom line and what you have to do to take care of it, not just for your sake, but for the sake of the people around you. So you can practice, so you can give, but then there are things where you feel like you would like to, have more discipline in an area or be less distracted by it, or anyway, I think you get my drift. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think I'll just put that here somewhere. Yeah, so well, I understand there to be two parts to the question there, Kyle. So first
part is, how do you know when you're ready to make the discernment, or when is the time to make the discernment, right? And that I can say, it only comes when you can observe the suffering, the clinging, or the whatever is the friction there clearly. Until that point, you can't really move the needle, right? This is why mindfulness is the first of the 7 factors of awakening, and mindfulness is said to be, one of the faculties, and mindfulness is said to be always useful, because until we can mindfully receive an experience, we can't actually do anything about it. We're not actually relating to it. We're relating in some kind of fuzzy way to our concept around it. So that's the first step, right? It's when you become clear about the harm, or the suffering, or the friction, or the difficulty in it, that you can start to respond skillfully. Once that's known, then sometimes there's this gap in time between when that's known and when you will actually make the change, right? And that's because of the strength, or the timeliness of the intention, right? So if the intention isn't strong, or isn't timely at the times when it needs to be present, then you'll kind of fall back, right? It's like trying to quit smoking, right? Quit for a couple of days, or 6 hours, and then you're back again, because the intention isn't strong enough to deal with the discomfort, really. But at some point, it could be, if you keep reestablishing that intention. So that's why eventually people do quit smoking, right? They're not completely overcome, usually. If they really want to, they will just quit smoking. At some point, they're able to overcome that, being overwhelmed by the discomfort of it. So that's the other aspect, right? Is that you have to kind of build up your tolerance for the discomfort of making a change.
But in a case like Toto's, or, some other, it's like, yes, smoking, I went through that myself. So,
Okay.
So I understand that.
Right.
Smoking is something non-smoking is something you can do. You might not like it, but you can do it.
Yes.
And at some point you get to the place where you can make that choice. But asthma is not something that you have control over, like, or other physical things like.
Right. So in that case, what you're doing is you're basically just responding to whatever the condition is, whether the condition arises. And what he observed, I think, was that part of the question of whether the condition arises has to do with his response, which is usually the case. Right?
You mean whether the asthma arises?
Yes.
Yeah. So he's responding to what?
To that initial condition. So in the same way, so like when I was there in the tea place, and then I'm responding to the condition, oh, I'm not actually hungry here, right? So the other condition of the aversion, when it was there and I wasn't aware of it, then I'm being pushed and pulled around by that. And so now I'm saying, oh, I want to do this other thing. You see? So if I increase my tolerance for the discomfort of the cold, then the aversion doesn't arise, and that doesn't fuel the other thing. It doesn't fuel the reactivity.
Mm.
Yeah? Okay. That sounds that got it. So that sounds clear. That sounds done. Okay. Great. Great. Okay, Lisa has her hand up.
Hi. Yeah, I'm going through a kind of tough time right now. I'm sitting like in the middle of a storm right now. I'm in this class that's about to come to an end and abrupt end. And I'm about to lose, some friendships there, some familiarity. And wanted to leave the class, just leave early so I didn't have to see this sadness and feel this pain, but I said, no, take this as a, a practice opportunity and just sit with it, which
Mhm.
is what I'm doing. I'm sitting still with it. And I did write this down. I wrote this little quote. I said, I sit still in the middle of this storm, oblivious to the howling wind or the sound of the howling wind, untouched by its forceful gusts, because I know everything is of the nature to change. But truth be told, I do hear the wind and I do feel its gusts, but
Yes.
I still sit here still in the midst of it. Um, and, it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to do, but I still sit here still in the midst of it.
Yes.
And so this talk today and the one earlier also, it's like a sign to me because it's like exactly what I needed to hear because I feel a little bit tense from all of this.
Mm.
So I kind of needed to hear about the joy and it's what I needed to hear today. It really is. So thank you so much.
Mm. I'm so glad that it's meeting you right where your heart is, Lisa. And yes, yes, you do hear it, the wind, the howl of it, right? You do experience that. And you're being true about that, being honest about that, and being with that, and letting it go when it's time for it to go will inevitably help you. So I hope that you have that confidence in yourself that that is exactly what you're doing.
Yes, I do. Thank you so much.
Other thoughts or questions, reflections? So many long faces. We guys, we're going to need you guys to watch the talk on joy that I gave earlier. Okay.
This may be like a little simplistic, but I guess when I heard the talk, I was just also thinking about my own aversion to bad feelings. And when I have bad feelings, just wanting to avoid them at all costs and having to sit with those.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then Lisa's comment made me think of that as well. Just, it's hard to sit with things that are uncomfortable, but if you do it, when you come out on the other end, it's going to be good.
Yes. Yeah, I appreciate the reflection, Michelle. And what comes to mind for me is like, yeah, and the alternative is such a mess, right? The alternative is just so much more of a mess in all sorts of different ways that we can get entangled. So, yeah, beautiful. And actually, I wanted to also say back to Lisa, writing a poem about your pain, it seems like a very, very classically Buddhist thing to do, We have entire collections of the Chinese masters writing poems about their path. And lots of other, the Tibetans and all kinds of, exactly. There you go, Michelle. It gives you some rockets. Nice. Nice. Yeah, writing a poem about your experience is a beautiful thing to do. And I would say definitely a highly Buddhist way of handling your feelings. Yeah. Yeah. Or finding a poem that relates to how you feel. I was working with some palliative care physicians around grief support recently, and I suggested that they would find a poem because they don't consider themselves to be poets yet, but that they could find a poem about each one of their patients that died. And so they've been doing that practice and sharing that practice. Yeah. All right, friends. Well, it seems like a quiet Sunday closing here. Dana, would you like to go ahead and make the announcement then? Caught you off guard a little early?
Good morning. All of a sudden Zoom was wanting to have a relationship with me unexpectedly. I must have hit something, but I'm back. Giving to Dassanaya Buddhist Community supports Dhammadīpā, our guiding teacher, the physical location at the vihara, and allows us to continue to offer Buddhist teachings in support of the awakening of all beings. On our support pages, under the support tab, we have donate, volunteer, and offer materials. And I wanted to share that we are in the midst of refreshing volunteer opportunities. So there are definitely interesting ways of participating further with the Sangha in addition to financial support. Thanks for the amazing talk today and wonderful to be with you all.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Thank you, Jose, also for putting the information in the chat there. And yes, your presence is a gift. All the supports are a tremendous gift. And may we know deep in our hearts that we are walking this way together. That Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha is here for us, as us. And may our practice lead to the end of all suffering and all delusion for ourselves and for all beings, that all beings might be free. By the power of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and each one's effort, may every being be completely liberated. Okay, friends. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Aya. Bye-bye.